and hospitals have capably trained doctors, nurses, or teachers to serve them, whether there are medicines, or books, or chalk, whether staff absenteeism is a problem, or even if the buildings themselves are located in the areas where they're most needed, rather than where they were most convenient to build. Obviously, local perspectives and participation are essential to make such projects work most effectively, and that's precisely what is most often missing. There are other problems with development aid. Aid givers' reporting requirements are onerous and often impose huge administrative burdens on developing countries, which have to devote the skills of scarce, educated, English language trained personnel to writing reports for donors rather than running programs. Donor agencies often snaffle up the best available talent themselves, usually at salaries that distort the local market. So there are countries, I've known a few myself, in which a doctor finds it more remunerative to work as a translator for a foreign aid agency than to treat poor patients. Meanwhile, the sheer clout that comes with the purchasing power of aid money dilutes the necessary accountability of officials and elected representatives in developing countries to their own local populations whom they are supposed to serve. Governments in developing countries spend more time and energy being accountable to donors than to their own people. The priorities funded by the foreigners often have more salience than the wishes of the people as expressed to and through their own leaders. The irony is that aid is most effective when it bolsters accountability, but it too often goes to unaccountable governments and actually fosters more unaccountability. The time has come, in other words, to change the way the world goes about the business of development. We need a genuine partnership, one in which developing countries take the lead, determining what they most acutely need and how best they need to go about it. Donor-driven and donor-directed aid will simply not be sustainable once the donors have left or run out of steam. If the retort comes that donors need to take charge because recipient countries don't simply have the needed capacity, the answer lies in helping create that capacity through training citizens of developing countries. Indeed, building human resource capacity is itself a useful way of fulfilling Goal 8. Donors themselves have an interest in doing this. It's the best way of ensuring their assistance is well used. Aligning their assistance with national development strategies where these exist, and helping countries devise such strategies where they don't, is smart from the donor's point of view too. Using national structures, or again helping create such structures, ensures their aid is usefully spent and guarantees the sustainability of the donor's effort. So, support an education policy rather than build a photogenic school. Aid a health campaign rather than construct a clinic. Or better still, do both as part of a policy or a campaign and not as standalone projects that look good on a donor document. I mentioned trade earlier. Trade is another key area. In contrast to aid, greater access to the markets of the developed world creates incentives and fosters institutions in the developing world that have the virtue of being self-sustaining, collectively policed, and inevitably with greater consequences for human welfare. In fact, two expatriate Indian economists, Raghuraman Rajan and Arvind Subramaniam, have argued that aid programs have often adverse effects on a country's long-term competitiveness in the global markets. In other words, the average tariff levels in the developed world would mean more over the long run than generous aid packages alone. Many countries wish to trade their way out of poverty, but they're prevented from doing so by the high tariff barriers, domestic subsidies, and other protections enjoyed by their competitors in rich countries. The European Union's agricultural subsidies, for instance, are even today high enough to permit every cow in Europe to fly business class around the world. This, literally. Now, this enables the European farmer, despite his higher initial costs, to squeeze the African farmer out of the European market. Such practices have to change. Now, don't get me wrong, none of this is to deny the importance of increased and more effective aid and what economists call process improvement techniques that assist human development. From the inexpensive chemically treated mosquito nets that Professor Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia has argued for, to the greater need to invest in immunization, as Professor Esther Duflo at MIT has advocated, students of development have come up with urgent requirements that the developed world needs to invest in to benefit the developing. But the economic dynamics of India and China, Singapore and Taiwan, countries large and small, reveal that trade changes societies faster and improves our collective well-being and security more than an aid-heavy agenda alone can provide. I also don't want to imply that all the onus should be placed on developed countries alone. After all, the Millennium Declaration, which established the MDGs, was signed on to by developing countries as well. They too have made serious commitments to their own people, and the first responsibility for fulfilling those commitments is theirs. But Goal 8 assured them they would not be alone in this effort. Unless more is done, it will be, as they say in Texas, according to Madeleine Albright, all hat and no cattle. Now, there is also quite simply a moral justification for fulfilling the challenge of Goal 8. Since Hindole insisted on reminding you all that I once was an Indian novelist, let me tell you an Indian story, a tale from our ancient Puranas. It's a typical Indian story of a sage and his disciples. So the sage asks his disciples, when does the night end? And the disciples say, at dawn, of course. The sage says, I know that. But when does the night end and the dawn begin? The first disciple, who's from the tropical south of India, where, as you know, I come from, replies, when the first glimmer of light across the sky reveals the palm fronds on the coconut trees swaying in the breeze, that is when the night ends and the dawn begins. The sage says no. So the second disciple, who's from our cold north, where my wife comes from, ventures, oh, I know, he says, when the first streaks of sunshine make the snow and ice gleam on the mountain tops of the Himalayas,